Chapter 2. Let's hear it for drugs. It's time for my usual meds, and as usual, it takes a few minutes to locate them all. My bowel-toning pills, the cholesterol pills, the prostate pills, the muscle and bone pills, the acid reflux pills, the pills for depression, and I think about my parents because when they died, a few years apart, I went through all their medications and discarded them by the bagful, and wondered whether their doctors had any idea at all of what they were doing, and how my parents managed to survive into their 80s with so many drugs in their system. And suddenly I'm thinking about the aggressive pharmaceutical salesman who was in my sensitivity training seminar years ago, who was black and handsome and beautifully dressed, and was one of two people who didn't want anyone to know what they did for a living, when that was one of the first and most important things everyone wanted to know about everyone. Because, as it turned out, he was uncomfortable with what he did for a living. The other person, who was reticent, finally, under great pressure at the last hour of the last weekend, admitted that he was a doctor, and explained that whenever he told people what he was, they presumed that's who he was, and dealt with him from a kind of skewed bias, so that they gave energy to his reticence. The Sensitivity Training Seminar was a UCLA extension program designed for middle management people who worked for someone else and had others working for them. It began with a weekend retreat for everyone at the remote conference center, then broke down into individual groups of about 10, which met locally for 8 weeks, and concluded with a final weekend when everyone shared how much they had progressed, or, if they were really diligent, evolved. My particular group, besides the doctor and the salesman, included a woman who owned a daycare center, the vice president of a large national corporation, and the comptroller of a major motion picture company. We had a leader, a trainer, named Luann Darling, who was very gentle and incisive. Initially, everyone was cautiously friendly, but Luann put us through our paces, and by the time we'd finished our first 3-hour dinner meeting, we'd begun to relax and to trust each other, at least tentatively. During the weeks that followed, there was lots of sharing, except for 1 or 2 holdouts, intimate details, revealing exercises, emotional outbursts. 8 weeks. For most of us, that proved to be more than enough. Others had barely warmed up. We were encouraged to speak freely, instructed to rock each other like a baby, persuaded to fall backwards and allow ourselves to be caught, remarkably difficult, and invited to close our eyes and to find the space we were in with our hands, then break out of it any way we could. Almost everyone stood tall, reached far out to their imaginary walls, and then burst free. But the studio comptroller, who was responsible for millions of dollars, got on his knees and held his hands palms out close to his body, defining his space as if it were a giant constricting egg, and then pecked his way out with his nose. During the last weekend, everywhere in the large merged banquet rooms, hundreds of people fell backwards, readily into hundreds of welcoming arms, except one woman, a weary, gray-haired lady who looked like a stern high school principal. She tried several times, and each time more and more people stopped to watch and grow silent, until the whole world was watching. But she couldn't do it. Despite the first weekend, and the 8 intimate weeks, and now the last time we'd all be safely and trustingly together, she couldn't fall backwards. And now she knew everyone was watching and waiting. She glanced around, looked over her shoulder at the teammate holding his arms out for her, encouraging her. Then she turned, lowered her head, and charged at him like a goat, butting him in the stomach with unexpected ferocity and nearly knocking him down. I recall the aggressive pharmaceutical salesman and the sad little lady, not without affection, as I take my daily allotment of pills, and gulping them all down, I wonder if I'm becoming my parents.